panel when you're ready. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here with the best and most exciting session at Gen this year. We are going to talk about a content management system for websites that are trying to do great work on having the best outputs in their organizations. For that, we have the stellar team of Kinsey from WordPress, who is leading the operations and is going to tell you how the project has been run. Then we have Mary, that is founder and CEO of the News Revenue Hub, a mission-driven media firm that helps new organizations develop and manage membership programs. And then we have Jim Albrecht, product manager at Google, that has been cooperating. So I've been talking to them about how did this project come around, and it's kind of a newsroom with experts in their fields. How can we come up with a content management system that provides all the solutions for the problems that media organizations are currently facing? So I'm going to pass on to the experts to tell us how this project started. Why do we need a content management system new program?
Thanks very much. So let me provide a little bit of context about why we think we can solve a problem that everybody's been grappling with for quite some time. I've spent much of the last 20 years or so in various news organizations driving digital innovation, and one of the perennial issues that we saw was how organizations of all kinds of different sizes and different media types struggled with technology, even the largest of them, whether to buy, whether to build, how to integrate third-party tools. And this was particularly true of the smallest newsrooms. When I was at National Public Radio, there were 268 member stations, and they all struggled mightily, even just to find the talent that could put together the right tools to help them find their way into the digital future. So, and there have been various efforts to try and come up with scaled solutions. The Knight Foundation, about a decade ago, funded a system that was developed for the Texas Tribune and for the Bay Citizen, which was a startup that Warren Hellman started in San Francisco that lasted about 3 or 4 years. The intention was to sort of begin to incubate something with those two digital publications and then scale it up to others. I think they eventually only got one more site to come on board. And so when I moved from the news industry to WordPress, which has been sort of generally embraced, particularly in newsrooms, but even by news enterprises, it seemed like a logical place from which to try and address this issue. I'm tempted to say once and for all, but inevitably it won't be. It will be an ongoing issue. But I partnered with Mary's organization and with Jim Brady, who until very recently was running Spirited Media, which was doing local startups in 3 different US markets. And what we essentially are proposing to do, we've raised money from Google, which has partnered with us, and from a couple of foundations and from Civil Media. And we're banding together to essentially put together what we've sometimes referred to as a sort of opinionated system, platform, if you will, that is both a publishing system, a distribution system, and perhaps most importantly, a monetization system that is designed to provide sort of the baseline that small and medium-sized news organizations need as a foundation to do their work, and hopefully provide something scalable and relatively simple to use that will allow them to focus and concentrate on the journalism and on how they develop business models going into the future and be less preoccupied with the underlying technology foundation. So when we say it's opinionated, essentially what we're trying to do is canvas the best practices across the industry and essentially preload and pre-configure the various both first-party and third-party systems that need to be part of that, and some of them will be turned on by default, and organizations will have the option to turn others on. And as this evolves over time, we'll keep pace with the changes in the industry and keep adding on to it and developing it as we go. But we're about 4 months into this project now. The first year is broken into 2 phases. The first phase, we put out a call for applications to the first dozen sites that are essentially going to help us prototype this. And we got 400 applications back, which was very encouraging. The next wave, once we get this launched sometime in September or October, will be to bring another 50 sites on board, and then 50 beyond that in subsequent years if this is successful. But one of the big goals is to demonstrate that we can actually drive adoption. It's relatively easy, at least as a software company, to put together the system. The harder part is it the right system, and will it be embraced broadly across the industry, which is really the test of the whole thing.
And I think for that, what was really good in this project was to work with Mary, who has the expertise and the direct contact throughout the process with NewsSpec on how and what newsrooms are looking for. So this user-focused experience allows you to bring the needs and then discuss among yourselves to understand what's the best practices for all media outlets. Mary, can you tell us a little bit about this research?
Yeah, I think our role in this whole project is really to continuously introduce a dose of reality into what the real world struggles are of small and medium-sized news organizations. I was a publisher at one of those news organizations, Voice of San Diego, for 6 years, so I know all too well what those daily struggles look like. And now, at the News Revenue Hub, we work with 35 different newsrooms around the country, helping them build reader revenue programs through membership programs. And so, you know, we have insight into each of these news organizations, and we really see the day-to-day struggles. What really brought this home to me about how serious the issue is and why we needed a solution like this was back in 2017, we were commissioned to do a study of strictly digital nonprofit news sites in the United States. They're all a part of a trade association called the Institute for Nonprofit News. And what we were looking for, what are the biggest challenges that they face in creating a sustainable business model? And obviously there are various challenges with a small newsroom, from not having a development team on staff to most of their employees wearing many different hats. But when we really started to pull back the layers to find out what else they were really dealing with, we found that more than 50% of the news organizations in INN saw fewer than 25,000 unique users per month. So they had such critically low reach that they really had no hope of putting together a viable business model. That means they had poor search engine optimization, poor load times, they were not mobile responsive, the user experience itself was incredibly poor. But more importantly, they didn't have a way to solve this problem. They didn't have money to invest in a new CMS. They didn't know how to even explore doing that. So they found themselves in a sense of paralysis, where they continued to produce really important news. Sometimes they're the only news producer in their community or their region, but it just wasn't reaching the residents, and therefore that's had an impact on democracy. So in our minds, we felt, if we're really going to help these news organizations build business models, we have to start at their core business system, which is their websites, and we have to help them figure out a way to build something that is going to allow them to reach the audiences that they need to reach in order to achieve their missions. And so that's what attracted us to this. And so, as Kenzie explained, the project came together rather quickly. But again, we didn't want to build something, we didn't want to make assumptions about what the needs were of these news organizations. We wanted everyone to weigh in. And so we conducted a very exhaustive user research process that included surveying more than 300 different sites around the world, including overseas here in Europe and South America. And we also did very intensive user research interviews to really find out what the main pain points were, what they were facing. And I don't think any of you would be very surprised. It was revenue generation. It was the ability to distribute content and make changes and be able to tell stories in a more innovative way. But the number one issue was that these news organizations didn't really have any confidence in their ability to make changes to their website, to try new things, to innovate in any way. So again, we kind of come back to that paralysis where they have ideas, they're doing incredibly important work, but they don't have the confidence in their own skills because they don't have a developer on staff to be able to execute some of these changes. And they're so afraid to press a button that might take their website offline that they simply just stick with the status quo. And so I think our main takeaway from a lot of the information that they gave us was, how do we give publishers and editors confidence in their platform? And how do we inspire them to believe that they can be innovative in their storytelling and that they can reach more people and that this whole industry has a hope of growing in a meaningful way?
Thank you, Mary. And Jim, on the side of product facing at Google for news organizations, what is the take that Google saw and is investing on this project? What is the main goal for Google to collaborate in this?
Well, I think my interest in this project probably started 6 or 7 years ago, which is quite a while before Kinsey thought of it. I was at a conference probably much like this, and there was a session on CMSs. And after the session, I was standing, everyone was at lunch, and I was standing with an old friend of mine, Mitch Gelman, and he looked out and he said, imagine if you took all the money that all of these people are spending on CMS systems, what a great CMS you could build. And it reminded me of, like, as a child, I remember hearing this story that relic vendors in Europe would sell pieces of the true cross of Christ. And if you took all of those pieces and put them together, you could build a skyscraper. And not to compare CMS owners with relic vendors, but maybe the people who contract to customize your CMS are a little bit like relic vendors. But I thought, my God, if you stacked up all the CMSs, surely it would go to the moon and back, right? And what a waste of this small amount of capital that small newsrooms are working with to not have a system that was consolidated, was built for their purposes. So why does that matter to Google? I think from our perspective, right, Google is in the business of helping end users find the information that they need to make their lives fruitful and productive. Some of that information, a non-trivial amount of that information, is actually created by local newsrooms. You can find out what's going on in your community. You find the information you need to be a citizen and be active in your community. And to the extent that the business of those companies doesn't work, it over time makes it hard for our business to work. If that information isn't being created, how do we deliver the value to our customers? So I fortunately ended up later in a job where, rather than directly serving the interests of Google end users with my products, my role at Google is actually to build things to make the ecosystem healthier. So a lot of that is tools for journalists. We have a fund called the Google News Initiative, some of you probably heard of, and investing that money in products that we think will be helpful, figuring out how we can interoperate with some of those products that we invest in. So really it was sort of love at first sight when Kinsey showed up and said, here's this thing we would like to do, an opinionated CMS that will solve the problem of small and local newsrooms. Part of my purview at Google is, with respect to the GNI, to think about how we will deploy a large portion of that money to help local newsrooms. So one of the things that we're doing as part of that is we're partnering with a variety of local publishers and setting up and running test local news sites. They're not tests in the sense of not being real. These are real product launches that these publishers are doing. We're supplying funding for it, but it's their product. And we're testing things, trying to understand what practices work. So partnering with Kinsey and Automatic gives us the ability, as we learn things, to funnel that information to someone who can actually make an impact with disseminating the information in a more powerful way than just saying, hey, here's a paper we publish, I hope you read it, and put that into practice at your business, right? Because we know there are issues technically, with the talent base that you can find, trying to hire in a community of 100,000 people? Are you going to get the greatest engineering team in the world? Could you afford to do so even if they were there? Similarly with product. So the opportunity for us is to learn in partnership with local publishers and turn that not just into documented experiment results, but actually into product that helps eliminate some of the distractions that have afflicted the effort of small newsrooms to get to sustainability.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about all the individual efforts that have been made over time to largely replicate systems that essentially perform the same function. I mean, some of this is a timing issue. There is a relationship between the technology you build and your capacity to innovate editorially and from a business standpoint. And I think in the early going, organizations that had any kind of scale wanted sort of close control of what they were building, because that was part of the process of understanding where to take this medium, how to practice journalism in the digital era. And I think we've now, 20, 25 years in, we're far enough along that there are enough established best practices that we can credibly begin to position something that actually works for people across the board without necessarily everybody having to have the same degree of control. But that was the resistance, I think, to earlier efforts in the past, that you didn't want just the sort of one-size-fits-all system that was designed by somebody in corporate and handed down and that you were required to use in a particular fashion. So the part of the test for us will be, can we stay on top of how the industry is evolving, how business models are evolving, stay close enough to that, and continue to add to the system as we go to, for people to be able to embrace it.
I think that's a great question, because I think you're right. We've only recently come to a time when you can say, well, there are some models of success, right? We know there are things that have worked out well and some things that haven't. And even today, to your point, I think it's going to be an ongoing effort to look at examples of success and be able to incorporate those features and practices into the platform and not be distracted by the latest, what I like to call the latest pivot to video, right? Is they're all, every year there's a fad that's going to save your business, and a lot of players go out and spend a lot of money on it, and it turns out there's not a lot there. So I think the tension is, when I look at the publishers we've spoken to, the ability to innovate on their platform has actually been a critical ingredient of success. And so you see there are a few examples of local publishers who are actually making a go of it, and they're very successful. But propagating that is the hard part, right? Somebody's in isolation with a sustainable business. It doesn't translate to another 100 sites who hear about it also being able to reproduce it. And again, some of it is they just can't. As you were saying, they can't make the changes to their CMS. They don't have the technical ability. So that propagation, I think, is one of the most important features of this.
I think that's what we're trying to create with this project. Is we've selected 10 charter news organizations that are real active news organizations in the US and overseas who are really helping to shape the product as it's being developed. And if we do this well, and this comes together as we're hoping it will be a living, breathing, organic organism that continues to evolve based on the evolution of the organizations who are working with it. And there is strength in numbers, and there's also, it gives confidence to other news organizations who see them embracing NewsPack and using it to grow their audience, to grow their newsletter list, to convert more casual readers to members, to retain them. Like, we actually are going to have real metrics for success, and we want to be able to share that as we go. And we can talk a little bit more about what does this platform actually, what are the features it's going to have, and why is it going to be more something that's going to help them take their business to the next level.
So we have here a stellar team of someone who has experience in media like no one else, that has understood the problems, who is now jumping on to come up with a project to solve these problems. We have the research, then we have product and the know-how of the market. So for a media organization, for instance, in Latin America, so many news organizations want to make their own CMS, they want to control, but then they burn lots of money there, and then they are like, help me. What is the process for a media organization to be involved and without feeling that they are losing the control over their own system, at the same time engaging on something that will guide them, to a bright future, hopefully?
I mean, it's probably worth talking about the open source nature of the platform itself and sort of how that plays into this. And there are two aspects of that. I mean, without getting terribly technical about it, WordPress is essentially a core platform on which developers have built somewhere between 30 and 50,000 different plugins that essentially attach to the main system. And so anybody can come along, and if they've got an innovation that they've developed, write some code around it, make it compatible with WordPress. What's different about this is we're essentially committing to vet those plugins for both security and interoperability. The beauty of open source is that it leads to all kinds of contributions to the larger system that you wouldn't be able to get if it was just a single proprietary system. The curse of open source is all kinds of things get built and you have no way of knowing whether they're actually going to play well together and work on the system. And that's part of, I mean, when we canvassed small and medium-sized news sites, we discovered that 65–70% of them were already on WordPress. But as Mary suggested, they're afraid to touch the system that's been developed for them because they don't know whether adding another element is going to break everything else. So part of what we're doing is essentially saying, let's take the very best that's out there and we will stand behind it and essentially vet the things that are going into it and make it very easy to activate them and for people to get onboarded and set up. It also assures the organizations that there's no lock-in here, that if we develop this and if Automatic, which is the parent company of WordPress, decides to raise prices through the roof or loses interest in the project, and all of it is open source, all of it can basically be picked up either by a single news organization and moved to some other platform or by another organization that wants to take the entire project and host it elsewhere. So we've tried to do it in a way that acknowledges that we're not always, we may not have the right answers for everything, and that there are going to be lots of contributors to this, but if we can sort of organize and make sense of this as a platform, that it will have a lot more value to folks than what they're able to do individually.
So this is like the collaboration in journalism taking place in real time, right, with experts coming together to solve a global problem. What are the biggest trends in terms of the needs that you have witnessed in your research that you guys are focused on that, it's a solution for the problems that you've been encountering?
I think revenue generation is everyone's #1 concern. Everyone is trying to develop more diverse business models. I think the first big question is, are they going to have paid subscriptions? Is there going to be a metered paywall? Or are they going to do volunteer membership programs? So this platform will have opportunities to do either or both, some type of hybrid. So the idea is you're starting a news organization or you're retooling your business model and you decide you want to start a membership program, you just turn on those features, which would include a very optimized donate button, lead acquisition features so that you can optimize the collection of newsletter subscribers, an integration into a customer relationship management system on the back end so that you can segment your messaging and send the right messages to the right people. Or if you want to go with a metered paywall, plug into a metered paywall option. So what we want is to be able to inspire good business decisions, provide analytics that give them the insights to make better business decisions on the business side, and then also address some of the major issues on the editorial side.
All right. And just one more question before we go to questions. So if you guys have questions, we're going to find the last 10 minutes for questions. What is the future of this project? What are your main goals? Where is like the light? Where are you going to go? Do you have like...
Well, I have an idea.
Let the funder
Kinsey,
answer.
can I tell you where your project's going to go? No, as I said, I think our hope is via the GNI we'll actually learn a lot about particularly these issues that Mary was just discussing in terms of monetization, right? There are a lot of different, and not just reader revenue, right, although that's an important component, But how do you make direct ad sales work? What are the kinds of products? And particularly my interest is the local communities, but other types of small newsrooms as well. How do you actually, what kind of products do you need? What kind of integrations with the site itself do you need in order to get local businesses excited about participating as advertisers? I've heard over and over again from successful local publishers that programmatic ads, I hate to say this being the Google guy, but programmatic ads just don't work for their business, full stop, right? I've talked to, easily a half a dozen publishers, local publishers who have sustainable businesses, and every time the story is the same. The kinds of experimentation they do, the kinds of innovation they do, the way they sell ads, it's the same story. So I think there are issues there in terms of what does the CMS present you in terms of how you traffic your ads. I think like the CRM element of it also is very important. So that's super important, I think, is being able to feed the learning we get in terms of achieving audience engagement and monetization into the product.
And one thing I'd mention, which we probably won't get to until we have another, get about 50 or so sites up, but we've committed to providing benchmarking data, essentially because all these sites are going to be on the same platform. We'll have visibility into what's working and what's not, and can provide sort of rolled up comparisons of how you're performing against a group of like sites that will give people insights into how they're doing individually in relation to the larger group. So that too, I think, will ultimately be valuable.
I would add one other thing that Mary was getting at, which is that this is maybe a little bit more forward-looking, but one of the other products I have on my plate is something called Subscribe with Google, and one of the things we're really focused on with that product is funnel management, essentially. How do we understand more about the user state so that you can make decisions in real time about, well, should I present an opportunity to read this content if you register, right, rather than go right to a paywall? Or does this user look like maybe they will contribute but maybe not subscribe? Or could I get them to sign up for a newsletter, right? There are various steps in the funnel that don't have to be as abrupt as you're a drive-by user and now suddenly you're paying me $10 a month. And so I think bringing that sort of intelligence of the user state to bear is something that would be an important success factor just overall on the monetization side.
I mean, and just having all of those best practices, A/B testing all of those different things and being able to share that with the sector, and then for all of us to be using standardized platforms so that we can experiment together and improve upon them could be transformational. I mean, it would be transformational to the 35 news organizations we work, and that's just scratching the surface. So, I mean, you really can't undersell what this could do for the industry, what it will do.
I'd like to open for questions. There's a few there, right there.
Yes, hello. I'm Philippe Hertzberg. I'm a consultant. Thanks a lot for this very inspiring new solution. I'm here.
There you
right
are.
Here. Sorry. Question about what do you see or foresee as the main resistance when you implement and present your solution? Is it, as you mentioned, lack of confidence, and that touches upon the culture of the organization? Is it the lack of integration between the editorial and the business side? So what are the hurdles that you currently are experimenting when you present your solution with the existing organizations and future ones?
I mean, I was stunned that we got as many applications as we did, candidly. I mean, for 400 organizations to sort of raise their hand and say they wanted to be part of the first wave of 12 when we didn't have a product built out yet, frankly, surprised me. And so I think in some ways we've gotten past sort of the resistance that I described earlier of everybody wanting to build their own. I think the concerns we're hearing, and they're obviously justified, is what's it going to cost? What does it take to sustain a system like this? We've set a pricing scheme. Essentially, the development work is being funded by Google, by grant money, and so forth. Once it gets into an operational role, We're going to be charging $1,000 a month to sites that have less than half a million dollars in revenue, and $2,000 a month for those who are over $500,000 in revenue. Some have said, who are just starting out and who don't have a lot of experience figuring out what their technology costs should be, have balked a little bit at that. We're trying to set it at a low enough level that it's affordable for folks, but high enough that we can actually sustain the promise of continuing to develop on top of it and stay current with new innovations and so forth. So we'll learn what makes sense. That represents 5% or less of an organization's budget at those levels, which, from my experience, if you're not spending 5% of your budget on technology, you're probably simply not going to succeed in this realm. But that's probably the biggest question mark right now. Interestingly, we have not encountered resistance to saying, look, we're going to be somewhat prescriptive about what we put in here. Well, you'll have choices, but we're going to limit the set of things that you can, particularly in the early going, that we'll be able to support. And people are sort of saying, that's great. We need somebody to help us make these decisions.
I think the one concern we get quite a bit is the fear of being able to successfully migrate all of their archival data over. If they've been publishing for 10 years and they have, a treasure trove of articles, they're very fearful that that content will not move over to the new site. And I think what's really nice about this project is migration support is part of it. It's not just here's a new website, good luck. We're going to actually help you migrate your data over and make sure that it's all being presented and help you work through the bugs.
There was another question here in the middle.
Hi, thank you very much for having this interesting talk with 3 different perspectives. There are so many new opportunities out there. We're talking IA, AMP, social, all these kind of formats. We're switching from horizontal to vertical. That means that there are a lot of new niche CMSs coming up. People are overloaded. They don't know what they're doing. Well, they know what they're doing, but they don't want to make the wrong choices, the wrong choice on these CMSs. Who is responsible for the integration / aggregation of those CMSs in order to empower the final publisher?
So I want to make sure I understood the question. So who's responsible for the
integration of all those CMSs? Because there are too many out there. You don't know where you should put your efforts on. You've got instant articles from Facebook. You've got AMP that is coming up as well. All those things, you have niche CMSs, and you're overloaded with the amount of CMSs that you don't know where your content is at anymore. Who is integrating them? Where are the integration possibilities between all of these?
Well, I mean, I think in many ways you've defined the problem.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're trying to solve with the opinionated CMS, is to say, Automatic is going to take a position and say, these are the important integrations. These are the ones that we're providing as a certified set of plugins and features. And then beyond that, there's freedom to customize as you see fit, but you wouldn't receive the same level of support. Am I putting words in your mouth?
No, that's correct. I mean, I think if you were to compare it, say, with other systems that have been developed off of from individual news organizations or from proprietary companies, they're essentially selling you a particular solution, and there's a certain amount of lock-in in that. We're really trying to borrow from as many different sources as we can and integrate the tools, both from an editorial and a business standpoint, that make the most sense for the organizations that are signing on. And some of this, I mean, in vetting the initial 12, we said, look, we're going to give you a site in the first 6 months that you can be proud to be on, but it may not do everything right out of the gate. And so for other organizations that come on in waves, if they do, I think it will only get better over time, but it may not be ripe for them at a particular moment. It depends on the maturity of the organization, the specialized needs that they have or not. So each organization is going to have to assess kind of how far it's developed at a certain point in time.
I would add one other thing to that, which is it's very unlikely that any small news site is going to live or die on whether they've integrated the latest hot fad output format. They could very well live or die on latency of their system, right? And so I think it's this question of prioritization of what are the things that actually contribute to sustainability, and what are the things that, gosh, that is nice to have maybe, or next year we might know whether there's anything there, right? And pushing those things down in the list of concerns that the local publisher has.
All right. It was very nice to talk to you. I'm sorry, we are running out of time, but I'm sure we're going to be able to ask some more questions on the rooftop. So see you there, and thank you so much. Thank you, guys.
Perfect timing. Jim, Mary, Kinsey,
Thank you.
Mariana, thank you so much. That was really interesting. Thank you. And yeah, I believe they're all going to be upstairs.